Welcome to Day 3 of the Adventist Chaplains World Congress. Our devotional this morning is presented by Marius Munteanu. He currently works at the Inter-European Division as Adventist Chaplaincy Ministries and Education Director. Over the years, he served as local church pastor, chaplain, departmental director, conference president, practical theology teacher, and president of Adventist University, Cernica in Romania, and the Romanian Union president. Marius is happily married to Loriana, a language and literature teacher. They are parents to Cesara.
In his book, My Utmost for His Highest, Oswald Chambers speaks to the ministers, saying, "Be aware of anything that competes with loyalty to Jesus Christ. The greatest competitor of devotion to Jesus is service for Him." Having this warning in mind, I respectfully invite you, fellow chaplains, to read together an Old Testament lesson coming to us from the time and the ministry of Amos. It is written that his job was that of a pastor, but he was also a picker of Egyptian figs. In fact, when he introduces himself, he says he is one of the shepherds of Tekoa, and it is quite possible that he was also a part-time chaplain or a volunteer chaplain, while fig picking was his main job. As far as the period of service is concerned, we are around 750 before Christ, when Jeroboam II was the ruler of the northern kingdom and Uzziah was the ruler of the southern one. Geopolitically, Israel's three major enemies, Assyria, Babylon, and Egypt, were not very active. In 805, Assyria subdued Syria and thus destroyed the power that would have imposed restrictions on Jeroboam II. Thus, in this power vacuum, Israel acted and gained control over some highly profitable international trade routes. This power and economic prosperity form the background of Amos' prophetic activity. Political and economic progress had led to an ethical and religious decline. The notable features of Israeli society were wealth, exploitation of the poor, and desire for profit. So, the book of Amos describes a culture in which wealth and wasteful consumption coexisted with desperate poverty. Does this seem common? In terms of religion, people still frequented worship centers and brought sacrifices, but the religion was only a superficial manifestation. Amos served a Laodicean church. The people appreciated God's judgment against their enemies and even against their brethren from Judah, but they and their rulers were rich and religious, but also corrupt. And for them, God had become an irrelevant deity. However, God cannot remain careless, watching Israel parade religion and effectively destroys the people. In this alarming context, full of secularized religious elements, God intervenes unannounced, saying in Amos 5:5, enough. Stop going to Gilgal, to Bethel, to Gilgal, or Beersheba. Look for me personally. Once religion is used for political purposes, remember what Jeroboam did with the 2 calves. God is no longer relevant. And E.G. White describes the context, saying, the final years of the unfortunate kingdom of Israel were characterized by such violence and bloodshed as never seen before. Even in the worst periods of division and agitation under the house of Ahab, the leaders had sown wind and they were now reaping a storm. King after king had been assassinated to make way for other ambitious rulers. They set up kings, the Lord said of these ungodly usurpers, without my consent, and they chose princes without my approval. So, what's wrong with Bethel, Gilgal, and Beersheba? Why not these 3? Maybe the text should have said, stop going to Samaria, to Edom, to Gaza. What's wrong with these 3 places, destinations, or symbols? Mainly, all 3 had become idolatrous centers of worship. But let's take a closer look at them. From a historical and semantic perspective, Bethel. Bethel means the house of God. The place where Jacob had the vision with the stairway to heaven. He got the word from Lord, go up to Bethel and settle there. It says in Judges, they went up to Bethel and inquired of God. Gilgal. This place could have served as God's history museum. Remember the text from Joshua 4, verse 20? And those 12 stones which they took out of the Jordan, Joshua set up at Gilgal. And he said to the people of Israel, when your children ask their fathers in times to come, what do these stones mean? Then you should let your children know, Israel passed over this Jordan on dry ground. Joshua had set camp at Gilgal. Saul was anointed king at Gilgal. And there was one of the 5 schools of the prophets also at Gilgal. The third one, Beersheba. Abraham lived in Beersheba, just like Isaac and Jacob. Joel and Abiah, Samuel's sons, were judges in Beersheba. So, why should we remove these 3 places from the to go to list? These 3 stand for just as many areas of contemporary life that needs reform. Bethel is about worship, our need for God. It's the spiritual dimension of life. Gilgal, it's about teaching. It's the thirst for knowledge. It's the intellectual dimension of existence. Beersheba, it's about justice. The nation's cry for embodied justice. It's the social missionary dimension of our call. But our old places of refuge, the memorable experiences of the past, the early histories, no longer have the power to give us salvation without our Lord. At Bethel we are told, stop putting your trust in worship without God. Replace formal religion with a person. And here is the warning regarding Gilgal. Do not invest in knowledge without God. As a source of teaching and knowledge, write God's address. And the lesson learned from Beersheba is, stop spending yourself for others in service without God. If you dream of doing justice as chaplain, ask the one who knows how to dress justice in grace. Without our Lord, Bethel, Gilgal, and Beersheba are just dangerous destinations with high risk potential, even if they used to be places of service or pilgrimage. And now, the core of the passage. In this disarming reality, in a society with secularized believers and devoid of landmarks, before any rebuke or warning, God sends his invitation. Seek the Lord and live. In fact, God's sermon from verse 5, Amos 5:5, begins in verse 4, saying, seek me and live, and ends with verse 6, seek the Lord and live. What does this seek me and live mean? Or as King James Version says, seek the Lord and ye shall live. It might be a beautiful promise of the Word of God, which summarizes in 2 short sentences all the depths and dreams of the created beings. But be aware, this is not God's blackmail. Do you want to live? Look for me. It's not a cause and its effect. If you are looking for me, you'll live. Now, these two, seek the Lord and live, form a unit. Live. Seek the Lord and live. That's the very definition of life. Where there is God, there is life. To seek God means to live. To look for God is to find Him, because God is love and He is also the source of life. The objective of the search for God is God Himself. Only this guarantees immunity from a society that worship golden calves, which teaches distorted truths and corrupts justice. Seek me means to look for God Himself and not for something that comes from Him, not for His gifts, not for what He does to us. When we live with God, Bethel, Gilgal, and Beersheba become our missionary destinations. At Bethel, we live according to our creed. At Gilgal, we will have the power to confront the unbiblical teachings. At Beersheba, we will have a model of justice. Micah 6:8 is the antidote to modern Beersheba, Gilgal, and Bethel. He has shown you, O mortal, what is good. And what does the Lord require of you? To act justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God. Search the Lord and you will live. This is one of our missions, or probably the mission to speak in favor of our Lord and to live accordingly as chaplains. Perhaps you have never heard of Catherine Lois. Catherine was the wife of Lewis Lois, warden at Sing Sing prison from 1920 to 1941. Sing Sing had the reputation of destroying wardens. The average warden's tenure before Lewis was, you cannot believe, 2 years. Somebody once said, the easiest way to get out of Sing Sing is to go in as a warden. In his more than 20 years there, he instituted numerous reforms, and an important part of his success was due to his wife Catherine. Catherine was a young mother with 3 small children when her husband became the chief official in charge of that prison. Everybody warned her from the very beginning that she should never set foot inside the prison walls. But that didn't stop Catherine. She took seriously the idea that the prisoners are human beings, worthy of attention and respect. She regularly visited inside the walls of Sing Sing. She encouraged the prisoners, ran errands for them, and spent time listening to them. Most importantly, she cared about them, and as a result, they cared deeply about her. Catherine's strength was to see the men there less as prisoners and more as individuals. When the first prison basketball game was held, organized, she walked into the gym with her 3 beautiful children and sat together in the stands with the inmates. Her attitude was, my husband and I are going to take care of this man, and I believe they will take care of me. I do not have to worry. And she insisted on getting acquainted with them and their records. She discovered, for example, one convicted murderer was blind. So she paid him a visit. Holding his hand in hers, she said, do you read Braille? What's Braille? He asked. Then she taught him how to read. Later, Catherine found a deaf mute in prison. She went to school to learn how to use sign language. Many said that Catherine was the body of Jesus that came alive again in Sing Sing in that period. Then one night in October of 1937, news was telegraphed between the prison cells that Catherine was killed in a car accident. The next morning, her husband Louis didn't come to work, so the acting warden took his place. It seemed almost instantly that the prison knew something was wrong. That morning, her body was resting in a casket in her home, not far from the prison, 3/4 of a mile. As the acting warden took his early morning walk, he was shocked to see a large crowd of the toughest, hardest looking criminals gathered like a herd of animals at the main gate. He came closer and noted tears of grief and sadness. He knew how much they loved Catherine. The prisoners petitioned the warden to allow them to attend her funeral coffin. He granted their strange request. And a few days later, the south gate of Sing Sing swung slowly open. The warden turned to them, faced the man, and said, "All right, man, you can go. Just be sure and check in tonight." Then he opened the gate, and a parade of criminals walked without a guard the 3/4 of a mile to stand in line to pay their final respect to Catherine Lois. Hundreds of men convicted of almost every crime conceivable, marched slowly from the prison gate to the coffin, reassembled at the house, and then returned to their cells. There were so many that they proceeded unguarded, but not one tried to escape. If he had, the others may have killed him on the spot, so devoted were they to Catherine Lewis, the woman who daily walked into hell to show the man a piece of heaven. And every one of them checked back in. Every one. In 1921, when Louis Lois became the warden at Sing Sing prison, no prison was tougher than Sing Sing. But when Louis retired some 20 years later, the prison had become a humanitarian institution. Those who studied the system said credit for change belonged to Louis. But when he was asked about the transformation, here is what he said: "I owe it all to my wonderful wife, Catherine, who is buried outside the prison walls. My fellow chaplain, search for God and live accordingly. Do right, love mercy, and walk humbly with your God." Amen.
Dr. Anderson,
Yes.
now we are going to be talking about one of the largest segments of our chaplaincy, campus chaplains.
Very necessary.
The campus chaplain is an individual especially trained to meet the spiritual, social, and emotional needs of persons in a campus settings. What type of training is necessary for campus chaplains? Are the essential elements to caring for souls in this context? This presentation provides a profile of the roles and responsibilities of the chaplain serving in an academic setting. Chaplain Dilys Brooks gives the basics you need in her presentation, Introduction to Campus Chaplaincy.
Welcome to a conversation about campus chaplaincy. My name is Dilys Brooks, and I want to share with you my story, my journey into this wonderful discipline of caring for souls. I'm a Christian, Seventh-day Adventist. I identify as an immigrant, Afro-Caribbean American, Gen Xer, clergy, chaplain, pastor's wife, mother, student. Why do I begin this conversation on campus chaplaincy that way? Because that's what chaplaincy in the campus context is all about. It's being able to identify the stories of the people you will come in contact with, determining the entrance point to then sort out how to provide care for their souls. So what makes up a campus chaplain? A person who says, hey, I want to do this kind of work, I want to prepare for this kind of work. What should one do? Well, The chaplain should be an ordained or otherwise credentialed religious professional. They should have a master's degree or higher, 4 units of clinical pastoral education. Additional training would be around the areas of pastoral counseling, trauma, grief counseling, conflict resolution, and crisis care. Campus chaplains need to be proficient with pluralistic contexts. What do I mean by that? We're living in the first time in my history anyway, where we have multiple generations, multiple cultures, multiple ethnicities, and multiple religious views inhabiting the same space. That's right, in the campus. And so anyone who wants to provide spiritual care in this context needs to be aware of pluralistic contexts and how pluralism shapes the way people experience their faith, reflect on their life relationships. So the campus chaplain, as we continue to flesh out the profile of a campus chaplain, typically they're the chief steward of the religious and spiritual life of school, college, or university. They provide pastoral care broadly and generously to the entire educational community. They offer counseling, support, encouragement to individuals, as well as comfort and wisdom to the institution at large. Campus chaplains offer compassionate and highly accessible emotional and spiritual support for students as they weather their joys and the development, intellectual, and spiritual challenges of young adulthood. Campus chaplains engage in compassionate and highly accessible emotional and spiritual support for faculty and staff as they weather the joys and the developmental, intellectual, and spiritual challenges associated with the life cycle. You see, the campus chaplain, when they enter into the life of the university, college, or high school setting, they're not just there to provide religious programming. They have to step into this role of assessment and then meeting the needs based on those assessments. They have to be also prepared to do theological reflection so that they can then determine how to meet the needs of the organization from the macro level, leadership, all the way down to the individuals who are in the classrooms or those providing support, whether they be staff, teachers, or other support staff in the organization. Finally, in the campus chaplain profile, we have to also remember that the campus chaplain leads or coordinates spiritual, liturgical, and educational programming, as well as provide pastoral care. They evaluate, they assess, they look at the life cycle of the individuals and then determine what kinds of care plans they need to provide to support the spiritual and emotional thriving of the constituents of the college, school, or university. I hope you're noticing that in my description of the campus chaplain and their profile, that I am naming both the care for the emotional as well as the spiritual as an integral part of the skills that a campus chaplain ought to have. Is to provide religious services, spiritual guidance, and counseling to those in need. They also provide spiritual or pastoral care and or counseling to individuals during times of transition or crisis. One of the realizations I had when I stepped into the campus chaplaincy space 15 years ago was how the lived experience of each person would coalesce in this one space. There were so many assumptions about the individuals who were showing up for education. There were assumptions on the parts of the students about who they would be learning from. There were assumptions on the part of the college professors and teachers of who they would be receiving in the classroom. And those embedded assumptions, embedded under ideas, shaped the experience. And one of the areas that appears as problematic often is the transition from whether they're leaving home for the first time and coming into a college setting, or transitioning from undergraduate to a graduate space. Whether or not this is the first year of teaching or the 15th year. All of these things shape the experience of the individuals under our care. And so when we are providing spiritual care or pastoral care, we have to take into consideration the multiple lived experiences of the individuals we're coming into contact with, both emotionally and spiritually. So in your role as a campus chaplain, one of the things that's really important to create is alliances for interdisciplinary care. The chaplain will often serve on committees, chapel committee, president's council. Chaplains should create alliances with the mental wellness support team for your organization. They could also be on the academic success team. They could be a member or simply an ally. And they also could be on the support for human resource department. They can show up for orientation, during retirement, during crisis or termination. For example, a student moves to the area and they learn that a family member has died. The campus chaplain is an appropriate individual to come alongside the academic dean and others in their program to find ways to support that student, both with the grief that is there, processing that loss, as well as helping them to navigate the rest of their academic responsibilities while they're in school. Now, I want to name one particular alliance that is a little tricky to navigate. Most of you who might be in a high school context, and even some in a college context, may find yourself sitting with a student during a process where they're dealing or meeting with a disciplinary team, whether it's because of behavior or academic. I encourage campus chaplains to really, as much as possible, get to know students before there is this type of challenge. Being on a discipline committee wouldn't be something that I would advise, simply because the chaplain ought to be, like Switzerland, as neutral as possible. They should be the individuals people can go to for counsel and support, not placed in a position of determining whether or not they stay or they leave. So for those of you who might be in a context where you are dealing with discipline, I want to encourage you to not take on a sitting role, just serve as an ally to provide support for the individuals, both the student who might be receiving news that they are going to be disconnected with the organization, as well as the faculty and staff or disciplinary team. Because it's not easy to sever relationships, right? I hope you caught that, because this is yet again another transition. So what are the essential elements of pastoral care? We've talked about the profile of a campus chaplain. We've talked about what the campus chaplain does. We've even talked about the alliances, interdisciplinary team that you can serve and be a part of. Now we'll look at the essential elements of pastoral care. Pastoral spiritual care has gone through an evolution over the years. I want to read this quote to you. Pastoral care consists of helping acts done by representative Christian persons directed towards the healing, sustaining, guiding, and reconciling of troubled persons whose troubles arise in the context of ultimate meanings and concerns. I think you would agree with me that when our young adults show up for their college education, that they are in the middle of their formation of their spiritual faith and identity. Yes, it is true that for quite a few of them, especially for those of you who are serving in an Adventist context or a Christian context, that many of those individuals who show up for a college education have been experienced or exposed to Christian faith. They've gone to church, they've participated in Pathfinders, they may even have been a part of AY and so on and so forth. Yet, the college years are the time when they are determining whether or not what they have been practicing will become theirs. In other words, whether mommy and daddy's faith, grandma's faith will be my faith. And they are also coming into ideas which absolutely will challenge what they have been taught up to this point. And so as a pastoral care provider, what we get to do is come alongside these individuals and help them navigate what they're learning, what they're hearing, and then compare that to what they know. The challenge for so many of us is feeling responsible for developing and making sure that when students finish college that they're still Christian, right? That's something that we spend a lot of time talking about. And I would like to challenge us as campus chaplains to think about it a little differently. What if we saw our role and responsibility as coming alongside our students, faculty, and staff and making sure that they have a good grasp of their faith and understanding, that they become critical and they can think through, navigate the things they will learn, whether that be in sociology, psychology, history, etc., and then hold those two things in tension, and then be able to move forward in life after graduation, having a clear understanding of how their faith informs their lives. That's part of what the campus chaplain gets to come alongside and facilitate in the university setting. Another definition of pastoral care is pastoral care and counseling involves the utilization by a person in ministry of one-on-one or small group relations to enable healing, empowerment, and growth to take place within individuals and their relationships. So pastoral care is the broad inclusive ministry of mutual healing and growth within a congregation and its community through the life cycle. Did you catch that? Did you catch that this particular author is saying congregation? That's because pastoral care and counseling developed in a church milieu, in a church context. However, we're talking about a campus context for our particular discipline. Another author says, pastoral care then is not only about listening, it is also about co-creating meanings arising from the care seeker's experience of God's compassion. So in campus chaplaincy, we come alongside all the individuals, whether they be faculty, staff, or students, and we provide the kind of spiritual care that enables them to live lives that are abundant, right? Jesus said he came that we might have life and have it more abundantly. And so we get to participate in this work. The only way we can participate in this work, though, is if we develop some skills, which we're going to cover in another workshop. Here's another definition of pastoral care, which we're going to unpack a little later. Pastoral care consists of helping activities participated in by people who recognize a transcendent dimension to human life, which, by the use of verbal or nonverbal, direct or indirect, literal or symbolic modes of communication, aim at preventing, relieving, or facilitating persons coping with anxieties. Pastoral care seeks to foster people's growth as full human beings together with the development of ecologically and socio-politically holistic communities in which all persons may live human lives. That was a big definition. And so I want to spend a few moments unpacking this particular definition. If you notice, in the three definitions I've given you thus far of pastoral care, they have gone through a progression. They've talked about the importance of caring, helping acts, right, done by representative Christian persons, directed towards healing, sustaining, guiding, and reconciling of troubled persons. They've talked about it is this inclusive ministry of mutual healing and growth within a congregation, its community through the life cycle. And then we've talked about a co-creative process between the person who's giving the pastoral care and the person who's on the receiving end. And then finally, we have this big, full, rich definition of pastoral care, which now includes not just those who are in a Christian-only context, but a context, as I mentioned earlier in our talk today, that is multi-ethnic, multi-religious, multicultural. So when we talk about helping activities with people who recognize transcendence, one of the things we have to navigate and think about is, even in our majority Christian Adventist context, we're finding more and more people coming to campus who are questioning or who have a different understanding of God or who have never been exposed to God at all. And so the campus chaplain's responsibility is to learn how to meet the needs of the varying individuals who are showing up in our context. Now, You're going to hear a lecture during this series from Dr. Terry Swenson, and he's going to be talking to us about postmodern and modern, and how postmodernism and how it has impacted not only the world, but the way that we provide spiritual care in campus settings. And this touches on, what I'm sharing touches on, and it's getting you ready for our conversation, his conversation about that. The individuals who are showing up for a college education, we cannot assume they're all coming in with the same understanding of the Christian faith. We cannot assume that they're all coming in with the same understanding of the Christian Adventist faith, right? We have to take into account that they're coming from varying social locations. Just as I shared with you at the beginning of my talk today, I am an Afro-Caribbean American woman, which means those intersecting realities shape the way that I go through the world and how I interact and encounter others. The approach to campus chaplaincy that I would like to provide for us that would take into account all the things we've just been talking about is an intercultural approach. So what does an intercultural approach to pastoral care look like? It looks like this. It believes or states or assumes that every human person is in certain respects like all others, like some others, and like no others. I'm going to repeat it again because I really want this to sink home. Every human person in certain respects is like all others, like some others, and like no other. This means, my friends, that when we are entering and engaging in pastoral care, we have to be able to assess our embedded ideas, our embedded theologies. We have to assess other people's embedded ideas and embedded theologies and how those challenge their ideas about themselves, about the world, and about God. Pastoral care in an intercultural approach is an expression of human concern through activities. Pastoral carers recognize transcendence. They recognize God. They believe that God is. Or for those of you who may be in environments where there are a lot of Muslim students or Buddhist students or atheists or people who are questioning or agnostic, it's developing the language that allows you to meet those individuals where they are. Pastoral care also entails multivariate forms of communication. Pastoral care at its core is motivated by love. The greatest commandment God told us through Jesus Christ is that we love God and we love people. And pastoral care aims at prevention and fostering human thriving. So we've been spending some time reflecting on pastoral care. And I am wondering if this language fits in your particular context. Perhaps you are in a context that is actually not, you're in a secular environment where you are having to navigate and deal with the pluralism that we named at the top of this presentation. So spiritual care is the phrase that allows us to toggle between explaining pastoral care in a predominantly Christian or faith-based context versus a context that is not predominantly Christian. A couple of things that are happening in our field as well is this: the training of chaplains who are Muslim specifically and Buddhist chaplains. There are even chaplains who are being trained who are humanists. And so our discipline of chaplaincy, our subdiscipline of campus chaplaincy, takes into consideration, again, the varying individuals' faith experiences, life experience, who show up both in the hospital setting, in the prison settings or correctional settings, in the business setting, and definitely in the campus setting. So you and I, as we provide pastoral or spiritual care, must stay in a space that allows us to be reflective, both of our own actions as well as the actions of the individuals who are before us. Currently, we are at a point in Earth's history that we've all not been before. I named the fact that we have multiple generations. We have boomers, Generation Xers, millennials, and Gen Zers entering in the workforce. entering into academia beyond high school. We're all existing in the same space and time. And then a broader picture is the multicultural aspect of things. We are right now navigating the challenges of a worldwide pandemic, right? We're also navigating the challenges of some of the issues that have come to fore. I am particularly aware of individuals who are serving in campuses outside of the United States, and the presentations that I'm making, that Pastor Terry are making, are very rooted in our lived experience and our location. However, campus chaplaincy and the principles behind it allow us to extrapolate and utilize some of the basic skills no matter where we are. We talked about the intercultural approach to pastoral care and how it takes into account the socio-political nature of communities and how we can, as chaplains, come alongside individuals in order to help them navigate those challenges. I am aware that many of you who are watching this presentation today on campus ministry are outside of my context. And I'm wondering, how has post-colonialism impacted your neck of the woods? We know that in the United States currently we're having this conversation about racism, systemic racism, and how it's impacted all of our lives. There's no person who's in the United States that's not having to wrestle with this in some shape or form. And we also know, based on what we've seen in the news, that there are individuals also around the world who are also having conversations about that. My social location, as I said, is an Afro-Caribbean American woman who was raised in the Caribbean and the United States. I have seen firsthand the impact of post-colonialism and the response to that period in our Earth's history. So I'm wondering, what does that look like in your context? Are you wrestling with that? For those of you who are serving on the beautiful continent of Africa or South America or Central America, for some of you who may be in the Philippines or other parts of Asia, post-colonialism is something that is embedded in the way of life of the people who are showing up on our campuses, whether they are teaching or they are coming to receive an education. And the intercultural approach to pastoral care or spiritual care allows you to take into account these nuances and these differences. So I want to share what does this look like in my role as a campus chaplain here at Loma Linda University. A student walks into the office, and based on my initial assessment, I can tell that this individual is from the African diaspora. And I begin in asking questions just to get some background information. Where are they from? And I find out that they are continental African descendant, or they themselves are first gen. They are here studying for school. And so as I am beginning to listen to and ask questions, what I'm doing is going, okay, this student is like others, right? They're a human being. They, whatever gender they identify by, they are showing up for pastoral or spiritual care, which means that they are like all the others who have come into my office at some point or another. However, as I go a little bit deeper with the questions and I start asking, and I learn that this particular student is wrestling with family back home and trying to figure out how they're going to fit in here because they do not have representatives from their particular cultural group on campus. And so I start to ask some more questions, and I discern that they are lacking community, and they are wanting to get connected with people. And so I reach out and I give them those opportunities to connect with other students that are similar to them in cultural experience and or heritage. However, as we continue to dig a little deeper and we get into conversations and we start moving towards the reason why this individual has shown up to the office, I start to see that while they are like all others, and they might be like some others, they are like no others. Because the issues that are coming to fore are not similar to the other individuals who may have come into the office to share, who came from their cultural background, right? I just wanted to give you just a snippet into what this looks like, this intercultural approach. And I could then say, for students who have come to me for spiritual care or who I bumped into on campus, who might identify as Hindi or Hindu, and we engage in conversations about what their faith means. Our students who are Muslim, we engage in conversations about how to support them in this particular milieu. I remember one student that I was with who was Muslim, and I didn't know that they were until they said they needed a place to pray. And so I remembered having to make an adjustment and going, I need to be curious and ask some more questions, because what I realized was that this particular individual who identified as Muslim was not like all the other Muslim students I had encountered. So I hope you are getting a sense of what I am meaning by an intercultural approach to pastoral care. And we will be talking about it some more in a couple other lectures that I'm going to be doing. Campus chaplaincy is this wonderful discipline within chaplaincy that I am so thankful you have said yes to engaging in your particular context. It is my hope that as you are serving your colleges, campuses, universities, that you are developing those skills necessary to assist you in providing that spiritual care and guidance that I named, not only for students, but also for your faculty and your staff. Oftentimes, the idea when people say, oh, you're a campus chaplain, their assumption is that the only people you take care of are the students. And it is not true. We cannot serve students without taking into consideration their faculty and the staff. We cannot serve faculty and staff without taking into consideration leadership and administration. So this relationship is a symbiotic, cyclical one, and it requires us developing and maintaining those skills that will allow us to meet the needs of the individuals that are there. So I want to recap for you what we have been covering for the last few moments together. The campus chaplain is an individual who is credentialed. They are a religious professional. They are trained both in their theological training as well as in any kind of psychosocial support that will allow them to assess and identify the needs of the individuals in their care. Pastoral caregivers, spiritual caregivers, chaplains, we get to come alongside individuals and use an intercultural approach to caregiving. We co-create meaning with our care seekers, and we love as Christ loved. I hope this has given you a great overview of this wonderful task that you and I have said yes to in serving people in campus contexts. We went through our presentation, and there was something that I wanted to just take a couple of minutes to unpack with you. I wished we were present so that we could do this as a dialogue as opposed to this monologue. I've described for you campus chaplaincy based on a definitely Western North American Seventh-day Adventist context and culture. And I wanted to name that one of the things I haven't been talking about is campus ministry. So often, our campus chaplain roles are attached to campus ministry. And one of the responsibilities for you and I, as we continue to develop professionally as chaplains, is to help our organizations have an understanding of the differences between the campus pastor, the campus chaplain, and the role of campus ministry. Let me speak specifically to those of us who find ourselves in Christian Adventist context, right? So when we're on a campus that is predominantly Adventist, campus ministry's focus is on the maintenance of the faith of our young adults as they matriculate through our schools. Absolutely wonderful thing to do. The chaplain in that particular role comes alongside students and helps them to make meaning. We've talked about this, of their faith, as they are now learning concepts, learning ideas, or specifically right now, as we're dealing with our political environment here in North America, as we are dealing with the socioeconomic challenges, as we're looking at the pandemic. So each young person comes to terms with what it is that they hear, what they have seen, and what they will choose to live out. And so the chaplain comes alongside them through the preaching, the teaching, the Bible studies, etc., the counseling, the one-on-one, the small groups, to help that young adult or those groups of young adults navigate and walk through that. One of the things we hope is that our children, when they graduate from college, that they don't graduate from faith. Well, the chaplain's specific role in this is to help them live with that tension. Because, friends, surely we know that everything does not remain black and white as we go through the life cycle of the human person, right? There are so many shades of grays. And so what we get to do is to come alongside them and help them process and navigate that. So as I made the presentations, you notice I didn't talk about campus ministry, primarily because the campus chaplain can lead, direct, facilitate, process, and support campus ministry. However, the chaplain's role and responsibility is spiritual care and nurturing of the entire organization. So I'm hoping that just this explanation helps provide context for why I didn't name chaplaincy as campus ministry, because it's not the same thing. So I was speaking to a majority space where everybody in the school might be Christian Seventh-day Adventists. Well, what happens when you're on a campus like mine, where we're at a ratio of about 49%? I wish Terry was here because he could give you the exact numbers. This is the thing he walks around in his head. I don't do that. But let's say that our particular mix right now at Loma Linda University Health may be 49% Christian Seventh-day Adventists, or Christian, and then the Seventh-day Adventists make up a large number of that. What do we do with all the other individuals who are showing up in our particular space as it speaks to, again, this idea of a campus ministry? Surely, Dilys, surely you see this as a prime opportunity for us to do evangelism and to share the good news of salvation and to win souls. Yes and no. Hear me out. Yes, unashamedly, unabashedly, we are clear that we are Christian Seventh-day Adventist organization, and we hold Jesus at the center, and we want, as our office, we talk about our goals center around know, grow, go. We want our students to know Jesus, to grow in their faith in Jesus, and to go and serve the world in the name of Jesus Christ. We are unapologetic about that. Now, as we center Christianity, however, we are also looking at who are the other people who are showing up on our campus. How does our ministry and care for them facilitate an exposure to Christianity that is winsome and inviting? Yes. And also allows them to grow in their own faith, right? Because it doesn't make any sense for me to look at, I shouldn't say it doesn't make any sense. It does make good sense. It is not a wise practice as a campus chaplain professional to see my responsibility to proselytize and change the Hindu or the Muslim or the agnostic or the atheist, because that's not my role and responsibility. My role and responsibility is to provide spiritual care and support for these individuals as they're navigating life. Does this mean I don't talk about my Christian faith? Absolutely not. What it means, though, is that when I'm engaging with pastoral care relationships with people who are of a different faith experience, that I ask them, remember, co-creating. I say to them, hey, what's helpful for you? In my particular faith tradition, this is what's helpful for me. If I'm not aware if this person is an agnostic or they're atheist or they're humanist, then what I get to do is come alongside for the ride. I get to learn so that I know how to help them grow in that space. Again, the campus chaplain's primary responsibility is not making someone into a believer of Jesus Christ. It is meeting them where they are. It is working from their faith commitments. I wouldn't want a Muslim chaplain if they were providing spiritual care for me in a context because that's what was available to try to make me Muslim, would I? No, I wouldn't. And so what we want to do is to practice hospitality, right? That kind of hospitality that separates us from people who are forcing faith on someone, especially when they're in a time of crisis or they are being pressed and challenged or dealing with transitions. So I'm hoping that this explanation just gives you a context for why we did not speak about or name campus ministry as the way that we go through the work of campus chaplaincy. In your particular part of the world, this may not be something that you're able to do currently. And so I want to encourage you to do the work of being challenged, of trying to figure out what your context is and what type of ministry you need to do in that particular context. I would caution you with this though. Be mindful to not use the word chaplain when what we're talking about is pastoring or evangelism, because the word chaplain has a meaning around the world. And so we want to make sure that whatever language we use to articulate the work that we are doing, that it meets with the organizations that accredit us, the organizations that certify us. So I'm hoping that what we have shared with you has given you some tools and resources to really help you in your work as a campus chaplain until we meet again.
Thank you for being a part of the 3rd Adventist Chaplains World Congress. It's time to take a break. We encourage you to get up and stretch, drink some water, and move around during the next 5 minutes. If you haven't liked and subscribed to the Adventist Chaplains YouTube channel, this is a perfect time to do that. Listen for the prompt of when the program will continue. It's time to continue the third Adventist Chaplains World Congress. Please join us as we continue the next session.
So Mario, this segment is about spiritual care in a multi-world setting. I think that's a very interesting topic. The question is, how do we share the gospel and provide spiritual care in a postmodern, post-Christian, post-colonial world? In Intersections, Spiritual Care in a Multi-World Setting, Chaplain Terry Swenson discusses the intersectionality of the people we meet in our chaplaincy and how we can provide competent, effective spiritual care.
Hello, Campus Chaplains. Today we're going to talk about a subject that is worldwide. It doesn't matter what context you're in, what institution you're at, what country you're at, who your populace is that you're giving care for on your campus. Intersections and the spiritual care in a multi-world is going to speak to what you and I face every day. We live in a world that's much different than the world I grew up in. I was born in the 50s, and if you were to look at my world would be white, suburban, Seventh-day Adventist, Southern California. So a lot of different pieces, but mostly in America, in white America, of which I grew up with, it was pretty homogenous. Anywhere you went, anything you saw in the media of our time, which was TV mainly, my life was reflected. But that is not the world that we live in today. As you can see by the slide that we've put up on the screen, our world is different. This is a picture taken in Times Square in New York. And if you could take time to roam around in this picture, you'd see in one picture what I want to share with you. There's people of all different generations, from very old to young, all different ethnic groups, all different cultures, all different genders. And even you have the modern signs facing towards us, yet you have the statues of the past facing back, all hustling and bustling in one place. That's the world that you and I are called to minister for Jesus Christ and give spiritual care to all the people that walk on our campuses. So let's talk about this. Let's talk about what we hold dear as a church. It's a word that I think we've coined practically, and it's called present truth. Now, for most of us as Seventh-day Adventists, when we say the term present truth, and speaking for me, which I need to pause and do, speaking as a white male boomer in the West, in America, in California. So I'm going to use analogies that are close to me, but I'm going to try to keep a world context in mind. This is one that if you're Adventist, we all hold, present truth. Most of the time when we think of present truth, we think of speaking end-time prophecies. But Ellen White had more in mind when she said this. Listen to this quote, and I read, "In Peter's time, there was present truth, or truth applicable to that present time. The church has ever had a present truth." So what is she saying there? No matter what historical, social, intersectional context we find ourselves in, the church has a truth to speak in that time. It's a gospel. It's what we believe in verity and for always, but spoken in a way that says the words, the images, the context of where we find ourselves located. Paul got this, and he lived it back in his context, which was multi-religious, multiracial, multicultural in the Mediterranean world he lived in. In 1 Corinthians 9, 20 through 24, Paul says this, "When I was with the Jews, I lived like a Jew to bring the Jews to Christ. When I was with those who followed the Jewish law, I too lived under the law, even though I'm not subject to the law. I did this so I could bring Christ to those who are under the law. When I'm with the Gentiles, he said, who do not follow the Jewish law, I too live apart from that law, so I can bring them to Christ. I don't ignore the law of God, I obey the law of Christ. And when I'm with those who are weak, I share their weakness. For I want to bring the weak to Christ. Yes, and look at this, I try to find common ground with everyone, doing everything I can to save some. I do everything to spread the good news and share in its blessings. So what Paul is saying here, he's not wishy-washy, he's not true to what he believes, but he's doing present truth in the present context that he found himself in. The gospel and the law of Christ spoken in a way and in a format and in a place that people could understand in the present position and context they found themselves in. So, let's look how Jesus made this live out. You as a chaplain are placed into a context. I'm at Loma Linda University. I'm director of spiritual care. You'll be hearing on some of the events from my chaplain, Dilys Brooks. And we find ourselves in a context of over 90 different countries are represented on our campus, 85 different religions. I have no idea what all of those are. Many different genders walking around in generations. How am I going to live this concept out that Paul says? Well, like I said, Jesus showed us an example in the story found in Matthew 9:19 through 13, where we find out where Jesus gives the call to Matthew. So I'm reading through it, and this is through the New Living Translation, if you want to follow along. Verse 9, as Jesus was walking along, he saw a man named Matthew sitting at his tax collector's booth. Follow me and be my disciple, Jesus said to him. So Matthew got up and followed him. Jesus saw Matthew. He went to where he was working. He gave him a call to transformatively leave one career to pick up the career and life of following Jesus. So the story goes in Matthew 10, or in verse 10, what happens in Matthew's response. Listen, later, Matthew invited Jesus and his disciples to his home as dinner guests. So far, so good. But then there's problems. Along with many tax collectors and disreputable sinners. Some say notorious sinners. So Matthew is doing what he does. His context is working at the office of extorting people with taxes and going home and partying with his friends who are other tax collectors, notorious sinners, and such at a party, at a dinner party. Jesus, come into my context. I want to celebrate with the people I know what I found in you. Now, verse 11, but when the Pharisees saw this, they asked his disciples, why does your teacher eat with such scum? Doesn't he know sacred and secular don't mix? You need to be over here. If you're going to get them, they need to change and come over here. So Jesus answers them in verse 12. When Jesus heard this, he said, healthy people don't need a doctor. Sick people do. Then he added, now go and learn the meaning of this scripture. I want you to show mercy, not offer sacrifices. For I've come to call not those who think they're righteous, but those who know they're sinners. So what is Jesus saying there with, I want you to show mercy, but not offer sacrifices? He's saying, not that offering sacrifices is wrong, not that living in a religious context and the sectionality that brings, and we'll talk about sectionality in a moment. But what he says is, go to the people, live among them, and be transformative, and bring them into an understanding of God. So let's look at some concepts here. Concept number one, Jesus did what was called incarnation. Jesus entered into the life and world of Matthew. He didn't stay in the context of heaven. He came and lived among humans in earth in the context that they lived in. God in the flesh, present and speaking to them in present truth. The second concept is this. contextualization. Contextualization is Jesus spoke in meaningful ways by both his words and actions to them. Matthew and his friends did not go in the temple. They did not take part of spiritual sacrifices. How do we know that? Because they were viewed as not as part of God's people. They were banned from coming in because they were unclean. So Jesus went to them, spoke in words that they understood, and contextualized the message of God in a way that they could understand. One more concept we want to look at, integration. Integration is this: Jesus brought their lives into his life concepts through relationships. Relationships. So there's incarnation. God comes into where they're at to mingle with them. Contextualization, he spoke in meaningful ways and words that would reverberate with them and actions. And integration, Jesus brought their lives into his life concepts through relationship. As spiritual caregivers, this is the model that we will do with our students, no matter who they are, where they're from, what they believe, from employees, faculty, and administration. So, knowing our times. If we're going to be able to know ourselves and provide adequate spiritual care to those we come in contact and serve, we need to understand and know our times, the context that we're living in, the country in which you're living in, the news that's happening with you both locally and globally, what's happening culturally, what are the milieus that everybody's dealing with every day, economically, politically, entertainment world. What is happening, and then we can understand and know our times, how people live, what people are experiencing, what forms and motivates how they live and act and function, what forms and motivates the individuals we encounter and our relationships with each other. If we can do that, we can give spiritual care that is transformative. You'll see on the screen a statement. And I'm sure you've heard from it. If you haven't read it, listened to it in media, or talked with people, I have heard this phrase hundreds, if not thousands of times, where people say, I am spiritual, I'm not religious. Have you heard that? I know you have. Have you ever stopped to ask them, what do they mean? The first time I read or saw that phrase, I kind of scratched my head and I was thinking, well, wait a minute. To me, spiritual and religious are synonyms. They kind of mean the same thing. They go hand in hand. I'm religious and I know the Spirit of God, spiritual, religious, synonyms. But in the world we live in today, that has changed. Now those words are antonyms. They mean the opposite things to people. So here's a nugget I want to give you that can be transformative and change your life and understanding of people in your interaction with them. Instead of saying, I'm spiritual, I'm not religious, is that good or bad? It could be good or bad. That's not the question to ask. The question to ask yourself is, and others is, what does that mean? What does that mean to that person? What does that mean to the context in which we live? So I ask people that, hundreds of people, inside and outside of classroom, off campus and on campus. And here's what I get. Well, I'm not religious because, name the religion, they put me in a box, they tell me what I have to do, they tell me I'm not good enough, or they push me out. I'm either in or out. I don't want to be a part of that. Well, in reality, do you really want to be a part of something like that too? That's not what we think of when we think of religion, but that's what they think. But when they say, I ask them, well, what does it mean to be spiritual? They'll say many different things, but it's like, how am I connected with the universe, to all of this around me? What does it mean that I'm here, and how do I function as an individual, and how do I function in the world and relationships that I'm in? Well, those aren't bad questions to ask. So we need to understand that and ask, what does that mean? So, famous saying by Ellen White, often quoted from Ministry of Healing, Ellen White says, Christ's method alone, let's pause, The only method that's going to work, you can have a million methods, but the one that is going to give true success is Christ's method. She says, Christ's method alone will give true success in reaching people. And how did he do it? The Savior mingled with men as one who desired their good. He showed his sympathy for them. Then he ministered to their needs, and he won their confidence. Then he bade them follow me. So let's unpack that a little bit. Let's look at what Christ's method alone is. First of all, it's one of incarnating into their world and experience. When you're working on campus with a student, or an employee, or a faculty, or administration, what's their world? You know your world. You know how you live and work. But what is theirs? What are they experiencing? What are they needing? I don't need them to be like me. I need to know them so I can take them to the God and the gospel that I know will be transformative to their life. So let me do like Jesus did with Matthew. Let me walk into their world and context. I need to understand that in Christ's method, there are no walls. I want you to think about that for a minute. The purpose of a wall is either to keep things or people out, or to keep things or people in. In Jesus' world, there's no walls. He tore down walls. He wanted to free people that were caught in their emotions, their situations, their experiences. He tore down walls that separated people that were artificially put up by race, ethnicity, politics, whatever. No walls. Come straight to God, and he would come straight to them. And then it was about inclusion, which ties with no walls, versus exclusion. The Jews were busy pushing people away. Sometimes we as a church, our church followers, push people away because they don't belong. Jesus kept drawing the circle and including more and more people. Paul caught this in Galatians 3:28. There's now in Jesus Christ, there's neither Greek nor Jew, free nor slave, male nor female. We're all one in Christ Jesus. So this inclusiveness and spiritual versus religion, people want to know about spirituality. Now, their spirituality may be different than yours. Believe me, it's going to be once you talk to people. But they want to understand spirituality. So speak to them from that. So for when I talk to people, I say, I follow Jesus, and I'm a member of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. Why? Because people have some concept of Jesus and they love him, whether they believe he's the Son of God or think he's a prophet or he's big on social justice, or they just like him. So we can find a commonality of spirituality. But I speak, my platform of authority or reference point comes from my Seventh-day Adventist Christianity. And then this. Our church has been this: believe, behave, belong. So first of all, you got to believe before I'll let you in. Then, if you believe, are you living it? Okay, now you're living it. Now you can belong. Jesus' method was totally flipped. And this is challenging, but it's what it was. Read the stories of the Gospels. Jesus said, like he did to Matthew, come on with me. All of a sudden, Matthew belonged in this following of Jesus. And he's going around with Jesus. Didn't know how to behave through that crazy party. Jesus went in there and didn't live the wrong way, but he exhibited how to live in the context in which Matthew was in. And he said, Matthew noticed, hey, Jesus and the disciples, they don't party, they don't drink, they don't, And he started to change his behavior, and then he believed. That's the method of Jesus Christ. So, I've come up with this concept, and you'll see on the slide on the screen. It's called Interplace, the Circle of Belonging. All right, I published a book on this. So let's take those things apart. The first part, interplace. If you picture a cross and you think of the two beams of the cross, interplace is where those beams intersect. Okay, it's a point of intersection. We're going to talk in a minute about intersectionality in our world today. But it's where the relationships of me with God, that's an intersection, and then me with myself and me with others comes together. it's like it says in Matthew 22:37 through 40, which is a key point to me in Scripture. Jesus says, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind. This is the first and great commandment. And the second one's like it. It comes with it. You can't have the two apart. Jesus is saying, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. On these two things hang all the law and the prophets. Well, what does Jesus mean there? That's what we call the Old Testament. That was the Scripture. All of Scripture, all of what God's universe is based on is this. First of all, loving God, then loving yourself, and loving others, because it says love your neighbor as yourself. Too often, and we'll talk about this in another, if you come to the other seminar I'm doing on caring for yourself, we'll talk about how loving God, loving yourself, and loving others is transformational for yourself and others. Where those beams of the cross intersect is a space, a circle, where there can be trust, acceptance, openness, and vulnerability. It's a space that we can make for relationships of dealing with people, all the different people of the world. We have a commonality of a need for those things. If those things are provided for us, by us to others, to other people, then they will open up and the Christ method will produce the transformation we desire. So let's talk for a minute for interplace, that intersecting place. It's formed by that relationship, first of all, between God and I. I understand what love is. I understand what acceptance is. I can trust God. He knows me. He sees everything I do, yet He loves me and He's accepting of me, and it transforms me. And I can do that with myself. And then once that interplace comes with my horizontal relationships, I can be transformational by showing acceptance, being trusting, being open to others. And when we do that, interplace becomes an emotional, mental, spiritual, physical place of community for others. So let's pause right there for a minute. Let's think of that. And now we'll enter into what is that the intersectional places of that diagram that I am talking about. Intersectionality. So intersectionality is a big word, and we're going to look at the definers of it, but it's all the things that you are that meets with all the things that I am that are the same and different. Do they match or are they not match? Let's go through the proper definition. I'm going to read it. Intersectionality investigates how intersecting power relationships influence social relationships across diverse societies, as well as an individual experience in everyday life. So, as an analytic tool, intersectionality views categories of race, class, gender, sexuality, nation, ability, ethnicity, and age, among other things, as interrelated and mutually shaping one another. Intersectionality is a way of understanding and explaining complexity in the world, in people, and in human experiences. Okay, let's unpack that. Did you see all those ways your intersections can be in life? So let's go back to what I said when we started. I was born in the 1950s in Los Angeles, Southern California, United States of America, white kid in the suburbs, and my world was white, and my world was a Seventh-day Adventist church and schools, and everything kind of looked the same, and everybody looked at gender and race and all kinds of things the same as far as I was concerned. There didn't seem to be all these differences. Or could it be we didn't recognize that? And I think that's the case. There's always been differences, as we saw in the relationship of Paul trying to deal with the differences in his ancient world, or Jesus dealing with the differences of people. When two people come together, there's all kinds of intersectionality coming on. Race, gender, perception of gender, religion, Where did you study and go to school? On and on and on. What color do you like? What foods can you eat? It can be totally overwhelming, but it doesn't need to be. The thing is, we just need to understand that there are those differences and to be aware of them. I think I would like to I'm going to share with you a key quote. The book, I always forget the title, sorry about that, but it's from a book my wife was studying for when she was studying for marriage and family therapy degree on caring for people of different cultures and ethnicity. It said this, listen, important. The dominant group of any culture or society does not view itself as a culture, it views itself as the norm. Did you catch that? The dominant group doesn't see itself as a group. It sees itself as what is normal. It doesn't matter where you're at, whether you're a country, a state, a city, an institution, your neighborhood, your day-to-day interactions. Whoever is the dominant group doesn't perceive itself as a group, an option. It views itself as what's good and normal. But yet there's other people in the room that could say the same things. So intersectionality takes that into consideration and realizes that I'm one of many. As a little picture on the slide says, there's all different shapes, or all the different little people shapes, the wood shapes, but they're all different colors, moving in different directions, facing in different ways. So Patricia Hill Collins says, this working definition that we read before describes intersectionality's core insight, namely that in a given society, at a given time, power relationships of race, class, gender, for example, are not discrete and mutually exclusive entities, but rather build on each other and work together, and that while often invisible, these intersecting power relationships affect all aspects of the social world. Let's simplify that. We may not see them, we may not even realize they're going on, but they are affecting the world, the relationships that we have in powerful ways. So it's important for us as chaplains, as caregivers, spiritual caregivers, to when we go into a relationship, we step into a place, we come with these intersectionalities, and we're talking to individuals or groups that have them too. And to be aware and to think about what could be coming at play. It could be as simple as a student on Loma Linda's campus, with me being a director and a chaplain, a spiritual guy, coming and speaking to them from a position of authority. That's scary, and I have to be cognizant of that. I have to know that going in. And you've done this too in your interactions, but really be purposeful to think of these intersectionalities. So, in a nutshell, what we're called to be is cross-cultural. A little play on words. Cross-cultural means we come with the culture of the cross, Jesus' method alone. And we're cross-cultural. So cross-cultural in the horizontal, cross-cultural in that I step across different intersectionalities to deal with people. Cross-cultural addresses God's view of intersectionality. How? First of all, by embracing diversity. Let that set for a minute. Embracing diversity. I recently broke down and did what's called 23andMe, one of those DNA tests. I wouldn't do it for a long time because I thought secretly, what are they going to do with my DNA? Till one of the nurses on campus here said, have you ever given blood? And I said, yes. They go, they got all the DNA they need. And I laughed and I go, I thought how silly I was being. So for a gift for my birthday, my wife got this kit for me, 23andMe, and I got the results of my DNA. Well, I found where I came from, found some interesting things. I have some stuff in me nobody told me, which was fun to find out. But one of the things that I found out from this 23andMe and studying it further is this. All of us, every human on this earth, has 99% the exact same DNA. Did you hear me? You, and you, and you, and you, everybody in the room has 99% exactly the same DNA as me. And it's only 1% of our DNA that makes us different, look different, all our differences. 1%. Do you realize what that means? That means that racial categories are bogus. We're all one race, the human race. 1% makes differences. So embrace the diversity. Who created it? God. He didn't make one kind of flower. He didn't make one kind of a bird or animal or human. All one, but we're all different. I'm certainly glad that's true when it comes to food. You embrace diversity in food if you're like me, but God and Jesus, when he was on earth, embraces diversity. Well, what else? Being cross-cultural establishes effective interface. You know, we're talking about intersectional interface. A lot of inters going on there. So by being this cross-cultural perspective, we can have this interface like Jesus did, because he didn't see, going back to Matthew as a betrayer of his nation, or thrown out of the synagogue, or a collaborator with the Romans, or Jesus saw Matthew as a man. Embrace diversity, establish effective interface. And one more, 3 big words: ethnocentrism, ethno-relativism, Christocentrism. Ethnocentrism means what we talked about before, that I look at my ethnicity, I look at my culture as center to the worldview. That my people, my ethnicity, my race, although we said there isn't race, but let's use that category, matters the most. So when I'm ethnocentrically centered, I will protect my race, I will live within my race, and any other race or ethnicity apart from that does not matter. Does not matter at all. They're on their own. I'm only focused on my group. Well, we see how that's played out in the world, and it's playing out not so good. Certainly not a cross-cultural way to live. That's not how Jesus lived. Ethno-relativism is much better. So where ethnocentrism says my ethnicity only, everything else is peripheral, ethno-relativism says, oh, yes, I am an ethnic group. I am a cultural group. I'm a racial group. I exist. I know how I live and function, but you're different. You have an ethnic group. You have a racial group. You have a cultural group. So, and it's valid too. So let's see how we can function. So you're you, I'm me. How do we work together? Now that's a wonderful step to take. That's certainly much better than ethnocentrism. But Jesus asks us in a cross-cultural way, to take a different step to Christocentrism. What does that mean? To view the world and others like Jesus does. So what Jesus does, just like he did with Matthew and others as we looked at, he didn't see the otherness of them first. He saw the sameness of people first. So Christocentrism, the text in Galatians says, there aren't all these slicing and dicing of individual. We're all one in Christ. We are sons and daughters of God. We are all connected to God. We're connected to what Jesus did. Whether I even know it or not, the people who don't know Jesus or believe in him. We are all connected through God. Therefore, we're all connected together. Christocentrism. And that's how you, as a spiritual caregiver, you, as a campus chaplain, have to live, have to function, and have to interface with people to be effective in the intersectionality of the world we live in today. So, if you remember that picture of the cross, look at the cross, and if you look where they intersect, right in there, picture a circle. And that's called the circle of belonging. When I was out shopping with my wife, I'd seen these little candles that you see on the screen, a picture of a circle. It's a little terracotta sculpture of friends with their arms interlocked in a circle, and in the middle is a candle flame. When you think of that space on the cross, I want you to think of a circle there, and that's the circle of belonging. So let's talk about what I mean. If we go back in the Bible to the very first 2 chapters in Genesis, it is the only portion in Scripture where we get a small view of what the world was created to be. It's a foreign view. It's certainly nothing that you and I experience. But it gives a picture of how God lined up things. So you know the 7 days of creation. I'm not going to go through that. Each day God said it was good, it was perfect. But at the end of it, when it was created, God did something else. It says in the midst of it, he created a garden. Why did he do that? This is a perfect world. What was the purpose of that garden? Well, the purpose of that garden, he created a space. The garden was a space, a nice background for what he wanted to go on in that garden. And what did he want to happen in that garden? Well, he created man, he created woman, he created humans. And in that garden, they were to live and grow and know each other in deepening relationship. And in that garden, it said that, God would come in the cool of the evening and walk with them and interface with them and interact with them, intersect in their life. Genesis 2:25 says something that's very interesting. It's talking about men and women getting married and leaving family and becoming one. Then it ends with, verse 25 says this very strange thing. And they were naked and they weren't ashamed. What did that mean? Well, I think it meant that in this space, they could trust each other. They could accept each other. There was complete openness, nothing hidden. And there was complete vulnerability. Not just physically, emotionally, mentally, and spiritually. Why do I say that? Well, that's what God has created, a space like that with those elements for transformational relationships between God and us with others. In Genesis 3, verses 7 through 13, we read how it all unravels when they broke the relationship with God and they quit trusting in the sovereignty and honesty of God, because trust is the basis of any love relationship, any kind of relationship. If there's no trust, there's no relationship. You know that in your own life and experience. When they broke that with God, everything fell apart. What's the first thing they did? They tried to cover with the fig leaves. Then when God comes to walk with them and calls to them, what do? Next, they hide. And then when God asks them, why are you hiding? Who told you were naked? They started blaming. And we do those things to this day. And the results are broken relationships and fear and living behind walls we create or others create for us. So the circle of belonging, picture that little circle of friends. Picture that circle in the cross. It's a space that we create. It doesn't need to be church. Church is a good space. It could be your living room of your house. It could be out by a stream. It could be anywhere. It's a place that we create as a community of believers or singularly one-on-one or with a group of people. The circle of belonging, the concept of reconciliation of those people with us and with God, brings to mind the reestablishment of relationships that have become disconnected. They become distant. Through the impacting interconnectedness of a Christ community, which we're a part of, Jesus wants to continue the work of reconciliation that God launched through the incarnation of Jesus Christ. It's also a reconciling community, inherently based on being relational. And to be relational, we have to know how to interact with a person, to be trustworthy, which means experiences over a time, to be accepting of people, to be open, share ourselves, and be open to what they share, and to be vulnerable. And we can do that because we know we have God filling us. And so we can open up that space for them as well. And then we participate with them in society, not as just an observer, but rather as a participant, or as it says on the screen, not only objectively, but subjectively as well. Objectively means I see it, subjectively means I feel it, and I'm a part of it. So, what are the circle of friends? It's God's community. It's Father, Son, Holy Spirit, 3 in 1. It's Adam and Eve, 2 becoming 1. It's this depth of relationship between God and us and God with others that forms a circle, so to speak, a space where these things can be transformative. If you remember that little picture, the candle in the middle, the lighting of the candle is the Holy Spirit and us incarnating in community. We go into their world and we become a part of their world and their issues and their needs and their things they rejoice about. And it lights up things, it gives life. And finally, the circle that is formed is that community that's developed. Whether you do it as a chaplain one-on-one with a student or an employee or faculty member administration, or you do it with a group of people, you form a circle where others feel they belong and could belong with you and with God. So, building a circle of belonging, once again, 2 things you have to have. Number 1, trust. As we spoke about, trust is the basic ingredient. It's the one you have to have. It's where you have built this bond where people feel safe with you, that you're a person they can actually know cares about them. To establish the trust of others in us, we must be willing to be transparent and vulnerable. That's the work we have to do as chaplains. What people see is what they get. And in a world where more often media and social media and all these intersectionalities have othered people, said they're less, marginalized them, caused people to retreat farther and farther back from being their true authentic self, it takes a lot. It's going to take time and experiences for them to trust you. But God's mandate is clear. Life comes through relationships to self, to others, and to God. And these relationships will only mature in the crucible of trust. So, when we've had this community that we're building, that they're a part of, that we're in their world, we've built these bridges of trust, we've made a climate where these individuals that we're caring for and interacting with can become self-confident, and then they'll be willing to be transparent and risk vulnerability. That's going to grow by the second piece that's so crucial, and that's acceptance. Acceptance. I accept them. What does that mean? I condone what they do? No. They're doing bad things and I don't tell them about it? No, not now. What does it mean? I accept them. I accept them as a human. I accept them that I'm one with them, even though there's a world of differences. I may be old, no hair, they're young with a lot of hair, white guy, woman of color, different religions, all these intersectionalities, but I accept them because I have a cross-cultural vision. I see them as the same as me. And when that acceptance comes, and they can learn to trust that, Mutual trust grows with self-disclosure, but self-disclosure will never happen unless individuals experience the second essential for community acceptance. Now, what happens when you have trust and acceptance? You build the circle. The foundation is there. Some other things to look at. In the book Building Community, the authors provide a list of essential elements that we can look at. They give us a bigger picture of how we make this space, how we build these relationships. So there's got to be a willingness to progressively disclose oneself appropriately. You just don't meet somebody for the first time and go into all the issues and depth of your life, but appropriately disclose yourself to someone else. There's got to be a willingness to receive the disclosures that others give you in confidentiality. Don't use them as a sermon illustration. Don't share what's going on in their life with others. That sacred space you've made for them to open up, receive that with confidentiality. You got to have consistent behavior. I mean, that's a given. You got to follow through on your commitments. Yeah, you ever be in a relationship where you loved and trust somebody and they didn't follow through? Not good. You affirm the acceptance of others. Avoid judging others. You're accepting them. Be trustworthy and honest. Focus on areas that you share in common and scrupulously avoid stereotypes. You see, because stereotypes are scripts that the culture we belong to has written about other people's lives. And Jesus said one thing: do not write scripts. Do not stereotype. He said it this way: don't judge, or you're going to be judged in the same way that you judged others. Only one judge, Jesus. To give spiritual care, don't stereotype people. So what happens, my friend? If you go back to the cross and the circle, it's not a diagram. It's created in real time. It's created in flesh. It's created in relationships. Where the relationship that I have with God and understand Him not as a set of doctrines or prophetic charts, which are all good, not even the way we worship or the time we worship or the programs we run. My relationship with God is the creator of the universe, who has created you and me for the means of being in deep relationship. That's what He wants. That got broken. So the plan was, we need God with flesh on. We need to relate to someone. That's how we're wired as human. That's how you're wired as a human being. That's certainly how I am wired as a human being. So God that was distant and far off wasn't good enough for our existence, and God knew it. And that's why in the fullness of time He sent Jesus in the flesh, that we could see, hear, talk to, laugh with, cry on His shoulder, eat with, be sad with, pray with. And when Jesus said, when you've seen me, you've seen the Father, we know that God is calling us to a deep, intimate relationship. He knows everything you do, everything I do. Sometimes I think I'm doing things nobody else knows. And God, and when I pray and I say, ooh, I shouldn't have done that, He goes, I know, I was there. We forget He's there. But He loves and accepts us. A covering of Jesus' righteousness covers us. And He says, I know you did that, Terry. Hurt me, hurt you. Let's do better. Let's change it. Let's move ahead. And in that depth of intimate relationship of His love for me, not for what I do or what I have or how I look, teaches me to love myself. That it's not how tall I am or how much money I have in my wallet or where I live or what, all this stuff. It's just me, how He's wired me up. That I can love myself, this relationship. Now I'm open for this one, where I can go to other people. And I don't have to be filled by them because God has filled me. So there's space in my relationship with my wife, my spouse, my children, my grandchildren, my best friends, with people I don't know, with strangers, with the student I meet, with the president or deans I pray with. We're humans that I don't need them to fill me. I can give them grace and acceptance and care and open up a space wherever they're willing to walk. And they can choose to walk out of that space or be in it. A place where that intersecting place of our lives for that moment can create that circle of belonging. Within inner place, the circle of belonging is manifested. And what is it? As we see on the screen, it's a place where everyone's life and experience is interwoven with each other. It's not going out and bringing someone into a church and then leaving them there. It's not going to church and say, praise the Lord, and how are you, brother? Well, happy Sabbath. Are you? I'm fine. No, we're not. But we don't tell the truth. It's a place where everyone's life, whoever's in the church, whoever's in your family, whoever's in your neighborhood, whoever lives and exists in the institution you give spiritual care for, is where everyone's life and experience is interwoven with each other. Interwoven. It is a place of warmth and acceptance and trust and openness and vulnerability. That circle of belonging. So the circle of belonging is a place of authenticity about our lives and struggles. I want to pause and share a story here to illustrate this. This is important. I don't know in your social context. I don't know in ministerial training that you received, but I'll share what I was told. I was told when I was studying to be a pastor, which I was before I became a chaplain. And the professor said this. He was a retired minister who had gone into teaching. He said, if you have a crisis in faith, if you're struggling with anything, don't let your church members know. Talk to your associate pastor, talk to another Adventist pastor. Only share them. Don't let anybody else know you're struggling or what you're wrestling with. And if there's not another Adventist pastor close by, well, then use another pastor of another church in the area you can trust with. But never let people know you're having a crisis. Well, what did that teach me to do? To hide. I'm covering just like Adam and Eve. I'm hiding. I'm shamed. I am not being authentic. I was being miserable as a pastor. And my wife, who's a wise woman, she made a mistake probably in marrying me. I don't know why she wasn't marrying me, but in every other aspect, she is a wise woman. And she said to me one day, she said, Terry, why don't you just be yourself? And I said, honey, I can't be myself. Can I? They might fire me. And she said, well, seems like you're going to walk away from ministry if you don't be authentic anyway. So I was. I once gave my testimony, which I don't have time to share here, but I had walked away from God for 11 years. I had left God, church, Adventism, everything behind. And God came and got me. And I lived a hard, wild life. So when I came back and I went into ministry, which is a whole nother story, I read the statement Ellen White made that the greatest sermon you can ever preach is the story of your life. Now that can mean two things. It can be the actual story of your life when you speak. It can also mean how you live. I think both are part of authenticity. But I was here at Loma Linda University, where I work. I gave a chapel talk to the whole university, and I told the story of my life and how where I went, how God came and got me through His love when I didn't deserve it. Undeserved grace. And He saved my life. After and I showed pictures of me, all kinds of things. After that, there was a person, a leader on campus at the time, who waited behind until the whole of the church was emptied. And they asked me this question. First of all, they said, Terry, that was a powerful message. I cannot believe what you've been through in your life and what God has done. I was deeply moved by it. But then they said this, and this is what shocked me. They asked me this question, but aren't you afraid? I was taken aback. Afraid of what? I said. And they said this, looking me in the eye. They said, aren't you afraid what that could do to your career by sharing all of that you did? I could never do that. And I thought, what a shame. That we walk around holding up masks of inauthenticity, when what God says the transformative power is when what you see is what you get. The circle of belonging has to be a place where I'm authentic about my life and my struggles, because I know how God has worked with me, and they see that, and it could speak to them who don't know God or don't know how to get through their trials. The circle of belonging is a place where we live deeply with each other. Come on, chaplain. Don't you want that? Don't you want that in all the relationships of your life? To have someone that cares and sees you and knows you and lives with you? The circle of belonging will allow that. No one walks this journey alone. That's what the Bible says. God says, I never leave you or forsake you. Romans 8 talks about nothing can separate me from the love of God. But He's also wanting us to walk with others as chaplains, as followers of Jesus, as spiritual caregivers. We are to not let anyone in our care and in our sight and who we come in contact with to walk alone. The kingdom community of Christ is birthed and thrives in the interplace, in the circle of belonging, and the heart of Jesus beats in its center. I hope this has empowered you to think of your ministry and your care in a different way. That your authenticity in your interactions can be transformed like mine have been when I've gone through these and seen these. That now, no matter where I go, no matter who I talk to, in whatever context that I'm in, I can walk in and offer the trust and acceptance and vulnerability and openness that I need to any individual I come in contact with. This works in marriages, in friendships, in your care as a campus chaplain, in all the areas of your life. And it will be effective. Why? Because it is a blueprint of Jesus. Why? Because it's Christ's method alone will bring to success. Why? Because that's how Jesus did it. Why? Because that's how He wants us to live our lives and bless others. God bless you in the spiritual care that you give.
Thank you for being a part of the 3rd Adventist Chaplains World Congress. It's time to take a break. We encourage you to get up and stretch, drink some water, and move around during the next 5 minutes. If you haven't liked and subscribed to the Adventist Chaplains YouTube channel, this is a perfect time to do that. Listen for the prompt of when the program will continue. It's time to continue the third Adventist Chaplains World Congress. Please join us as we continue the next session.
In any profession, having the tools is very important. It's extremely important.
Essential.
It's essential, yes. So, welcome to Chaplaincy Ministry. Where should we begin? What are the skills or essential tools or elements of a spiritual or pastoral care and what they need in the campus context? The Chaplain's Toolbox by Chaplain Dilys Brooks is designed to assist campus chaplains as they serve those who need support along their journey in academic settings.
So now we're going to spend some time talking about the Chaplain's Toolbox. Yes, you heard me, the Chaplain's Toolbox. The way I'm wired, I like to know what I'm doing and I like to know what tools are at my disposal. So we're going to spend time right now talking about what are the tools for the campus chaplain as they serve in a campus community. For review, we talked about what a chaplain does. So the chaplain's most important job is to provide religious services, spiritual guidance, and counseling to those in need. We also said the chaplain provides pastoral or spiritual care and or counseling to individuals during times of transition and crisis. So after we defined pastoral care as consisting of helping acts done by representative Christian persons, directed towards healing, sustaining, guiding, and reconciling of troubled persons whose trouble arise in the context of ultimate meaning and concerns. And that was the Kleb and Jekyll definition from 1967. We also went over the Kleinbell definition. Pastoral care and counseling involves the utilization by a person in the ministry of one-on-one or small group relations to enable healing, empowerment, and growth to take place with the individuals and their relationships. So we see that pastoral care is a broad, inclusive ministry of mutual healing and growing within a community or a congregation through the life cycle. So let's talk about the functions and or modes of care of the chaplain. Healing, sustaining, guiding, reconciling, nurturing, liberating, empowering, or advocating. So let's talk about that for a moment. So the mode of care for the chaplain for healing. It is a pastoral function that aims to overcome some impairment by restoring the person to wholeness and by leading them to advance beyond their previous condition, right? So when you come alongside, whether that's a faculty member, a staff member, or a student, or the parent of a student, we are going to determine which mode is appropriate in that moment. Another mode, reconciling. And reconciling is seeking to reestablish broken relationships between man and fellow man or between man and God, right? Historically, reconciling has been employed two modes, which is forgiveness and discipline. So you're either going to be doing healing or reconciling. The next one is empowering. And the empowering mode of care is to help those individuals facilitate the individuals, co-create with the individuals that you're providing pastoral care, the ability to liberate themselves from whatever it is that has them living a limited experience. Another mode of care is sustaining. So sustaining speaks to helping a hurting person to endure and to transcend a circumstance in which restoration to their former condition or recuperation from their malady is either impossible or so remote as to seem improbable. And so again, we are coming alongside this individual and providing those supports through our interventions to help them receive sustenance during this challenging time. Another mode of care is nurturing. Nurturing speaks to our ability to enable people to develop their potentialities throughout the life journey with all of its valleys, peaks, and plateaus. Nurturing and guiding are the pastoral care functions in which education and counseling are most intertwined, right? Many parents and teachers in schools see this function as critical in the achievement of their community's educational mission. So we see that nurturing and guiding, those two work together. Then there is the pastoral mode of care called advocacy. The chaplain as an advocate speaks up for change to help people flourish. Guiding is assisting perplexed persons to make confident choices between alternative courses of thought and action when such choices are viewed as affecting the present and the future state of human wholeness. Finally, liberating. Liberating is raising a critical awareness of sources and causes of oppression in society, and it helps to identify conditions that create change. So when we talk about the modes of care, it is really important for you and I as campus chaplains to identify which mode of care is appropriate as we come into a caring situation. Sometimes we use several of them in tandem, and other times we only use one for a specific portion of our pastoral caring relationship. So again, they are healing, reconciling, empowering, sustaining, nurturing, advocacy, guiding, and liberating. As a campus chaplain, one of the things you're often going to have to do is to articulate to the people you're working with your role, your context, and your function, because most people do not understand what we do as campus chaplains. So as we talk about your toolbox against the backdrop of those modes of care, and I'll refer to them again, here are the primary tools of the chaplain. Number one, listen. Chaplain's primary tool is the ability to listen. So if I was going to break down listen, what would it look like? It would look like this. Look and be interested. Yeah. When you and I are engaging with individuals, we have to be fully present. Not just this idea of a ministry of presence, the idea of being fully focused and engaged with the person we are interacting with. Then we inquire with open questions. The Socratic mode of questions are a wonderful way to elicit information from the individual you're providing care as you co-create with them a path towards their healing and ability to live a life that's just a reflection of human flourishing. The S in listen stands for stay alive to the speaker. We live in a day and age where people are always using some kind of device. We live in a distracted space and time. And so a chaplain's primary tool, listening, engages with this idea of staying focused, staying alive, being able to use your peripheral vision if you need to, like avoid hurt or harm, but definitely being able to stay alive to the speaker and seeming really interested and connected. The T in listen stands for testing your understanding by checking in. You can say things like, so what I hear you saying is this, am I correct? And that will allow you to stay focused, to stay alive to the speaker, and to make sure the questions that you are engaging in are helping you stay on track with the needs of the care seeker. The E in listen, it stands for empathize. Empathy is in such dire need today. People are screaming out, crying out, looking for help. And yet when they say what they're doing or how they're feeling, the individual who receives their messaging doesn't always have communicate or demonstrate empathy. And this empathy is not pity, it's not sympathy, it's actually being able to communicate to the person you're talking to an awareness of the emotions, an awareness of the impact of the story that they're sharing with you has had on them, and to communicate this desire to care for them and care about them while they're going through this particular issue or circumstance in their life. And the N in listen stands for neutralizing your feelings. Yes, you heard me correctly. Neutralize your feelings. One of the tools that I have acquired going through clinical pastoral education is self-reflection. And the clinical pastoral education model is action, reflection, and action. And what does that mean? It means that when the chaplain is engaged with someone in a pastoral or spiritual care experience, we practice reflecting on our actions in the moment. And as we do that, we're able to check in with our own feelings and we learn how to neutralize them. So, for example, I have a student coming into the office, or I'm talking with an employee and they are sharing with me an experience that they had that has been traumatic for them or problematic for them. And as I am engaging with them, I sense within myself annoyance or frustration. Part of my training as a chaplain is to then tap into, well, why am I feeling annoyed or frustrated in this moment? Is it something that the person is saying that is impacting me? Or was it something that happened before? And I have to do this quickly because I'm trying to, yeah, you're right. I'm trying to stay alive to the speaker and trying to be with them in the moment. And so what I need to do is to self-regulate, to self-reflect, be aware of those emotions, tamper those emotions down so that I can process them later, and so that it does not interfere with my ability to use my number one tool in the Campus Chaplains experience, which is to listen. Listening well, and it can be categorized in two ways: empathetic listening and interpathic listening. So empathetic listening is the kind of listening in which caregivers from within the communities truly enter into the life views of the care seekers, right? Interpathic is then when the caregivers from outside the communities also attempt to enter into the life experience of the care seekers. So the difference between empathetic and interpathic, did you catch that? Is that one has you living within the experience and the other has you coming from the outside. Now, Emmanuel Larte says that deep listening to people is the first skill needed for all of us who seek to minister in complex situations. And I think you would agree with me. We are living in one of the most complex times in Earth's history as we know it. The scriptures tell us there's nothing new under the sun. And so I'm just so thankful that God knows what's going on. And I'm also thankful that we're living at the time in Earth's history where we have an ability to pull from so many resources to be able to name and define and identify what's going on. So we're either going to be empathetic or interpathic. And as chaplains, as we're using our number one tool of listening, we go back and forth between the two so that we can know how to apply them. So what are we listening to? I'm glad you asked. We're listening to story. It's all about story. So our second tool in our toolbox is storytelling. Storytelling requires self-reflexivity and theological reflexivity. First, in terms of the caregiver's lived theology, which means you and I, right? We have to be self-reflexive. We have to practice theological reflection as we enter into a caregiving experience. What happens when you are a Christian and you are called to provide care to an employee or a student who has a different theological framework than yourself? What if you're walking in to provide care for a Muslim student? One incident that happened on our campus that I can think of that fits this example, several years ago, unfortunately, there was a shooting that occurred in our community here in Southern California, which is where I work. And I remembered I was providing devotionals for one of our schools at least once a week. And I was providing the devotional that morning, and we were reflecting as a group on the shooting that had happened the day before. I was aware that we had some faculty members who were Muslim. And so part of my sharing in the devotional time that day was saying how I, as a woman of color, when I heard about the shooting, I was running through with the group, processing with them what my thoughts were. I remember telling them the first thing I was hoping was, I was like, I pray it's not somebody Black Jesus. I hope It wasn't a black person that did this. And then I told them, as soon as I thought about that, the next thought that crossed my mind when I kept hearing the reports was that, oh my goodness, I hope it's not someone who's Muslim. Now, am I a Muslim? I don't know. No, I'm not. However, because of my experience as a black woman living in America, I have an understanding of how, when crimes or incidents happen in the public view, how the entire grouping of people take on a responsibility for that. And so that's an example of self-reflexivity, right? And as it turns out, one of our Muslim faculty members came to worship that morning and walked in as I was talking about my own thoughts about the incident, and then sharing how my empathy was awakened for every Muslim in our community, because I knew that as a result of this crime, that all the Muslims would feel this burden of responsibility, right? So that is an example of self-reflexivity. And our faculty member said, once we gave him an opportunity to speak, how he appreciated us talking about it, because he had been on the phone with members of the Muslim community trying to identify who these people were. And more so, which was what was really heartbreaking for me, they were having a conversation about whether or not they would send their children to school that day, because they were concerned that they would come under harm because of this act by one individual. So as we enter the spiritual caring moment, storytelling is that second tool. We, as the caregivers, need to practice our own self-reflexivity, and the theological reflexivity is to be able to see, what does God have to say about these incidences, recalling and reflecting on the scriptures that will allow us to help process what we're hearing with the individual who is seeking care, and also processing our own theology, especially if we're in a caring situation with someone who has a totally different theological or non-theistic way of reflecting and looking at life. The second thing we want to talk about when we look at storytelling is that the pastoral care practitioner is a story listener, a story stimulator, a story interpreter, and a story prohibitor. As we are utilizing our first tool of listening, when we engage with the second tool of storytelling, we have to be mindful that we ask questions in the right moment, the right kind of questions, to elicit this continuous process. And remember, I named that the pastoral care experience is a co-creation. This is where the co-creation takes place. Because the person who is sharing, you as a campus chaplain, I as a chaplain, we're listening, are asking questions to get more. We're interpreting. We're reflecting. We're also reflecting both for ourselves and theologically. And then we have to be careful that our body language, our inability to stay focused, or our mind wandering, or our own activation around this doesn't cause us to stop the story from being fully told. And one of the things I want to name here is this, that as a campus chaplain, our relationships with people are very different from many hospital experiences, because we sometimes are with people over a 2, 3, 4, 5-year period. Sometimes we only engage with them once or twice. And so some of the story will not get fully unfolded in a one and done type of experience. So we have to be mindful of that. So when you're doing pastoral care in a pluralistic setting, because we've already said this, that none of us are working in a setting that is not impacted by pluralism, here are the different types of settings that you will encounter. You're either going to have a monoculturalist experience, a cross-cultural experience, or a multiculturalist experience. And what do I mean by that? If you happen to be fortunate to be in an environment where everyone is like you, right? Where you are in a predominantly white environment, predominantly black environment, where all the people that are there think the same, act the same. For some of us in our Adventist context, for many of you, you're working on campuses that are Adventist, so it might feel monocultural because everyone is Adventist or identifies as Adventist. What will happen though is that you will start to see that if you try to come with a standard way of dealing with issues, that it's actually not gonna work in that setting, because as we've named, there are intersections that come along in people's story. In a cross-culturalist approach to pastoral care, what the pastoral caregiver will do is say, well, I recognize that I'm not from this people group, I'm not from this particular experience, and so you come into it trying to learn some of the basic things about the culture, but you're not necessarily embedded in that particular culture, right? So for instance, you all know, you can see that I'm a Black woman. As I am trying to engage with students, for example, who may be coming from India, it is a cross-cultural experience because they are Indian, I am African American, Afro-Caribbean American, and as I engage with them, I am bringing into that experience my own experiences as a woman of color, but they are also individuals of color. And so we are learning from one another how to navigate and engage in this caring experience. From a multiculturalist perspective, that then really sums up the milieu that I find myself in here at Loma Linda University. We have multiple cultures. So when we're engaging in pastoral care or spiritual care, we need to learn to take into account the intersecting cultures that may exist in the pastoral caring space and even in the lives of the individuals who we are engaging with. I want to remind you that the intercultural approach is the one that works best for us as chaplains. And that approach, again, just a reminder, is that every human person is, in certain respects, like all others, like some others, and like no others. As we continue with the storytelling tool, number 2, we also want to talk a little bit about story crafting. As you are engaging with the person who is seeking out care, one of the things we want to do is remember it's a co-creative process between the spiritual caregiver and the care receiver. Why am I saying co-creative? When a person comes to pastoral care, it is not an opportunity for you or I to preach at them or preach to them. It is an opportunity to engage with them. Remember, we're listening, to ask those questions that will elicit for us information to help us help this individual, whether we're using our healing, guiding, sustaining, nurturing, advocacy, liberating mode of care. So story crafting is so important in our toolkit because this co-creative process between the spiritual caregiver and the care receiver allows us to determine what is really going on. Pastoral care also seeks to mediate and communicate love across barriers and between peoples. So as we are listening to the story, we are looking for ways in which we can help to mediate and communicate God's love across the barriers and between people. One of the things that I utilize a lot lately, thanks to a woman, I'm not sure if you've heard of her, but her name is Brene Brown. She's a sociologist, and she has been doing all this work here in the United States and inviting all of us to be vulnerable, to share our stories, and to tell. And so a phrase that I have been using that she lifts up is the story I'm telling myself. So often when you engage with people in a pastoral care relationship, as they are telling their story, as they're crafting their story with us, it is important to be able to elicit what is the story people are telling themselves and what really, really happened, right? And so for the pastoral care provider, what we're seeking to do is to mediate and communicate the love across the story I'm telling myself and what really happened. We're seeking to break down those barriers between people and God. So we've talked about listening as a major and important tool. We've talked about storytelling, and we've talked about story crafting as an important tool for pastoral care. So the essentials, we've covered these. It is the expression of human concern through activities. We recognize that people have come to know who God is or desiring to know God. And if you're working in a pluralistic environment where people are still searching and seeking, it's identifying their relationship with transcendence, whether or not they are open to that possibility. So what happens when you are in a pastoral care experience and you find yourself being challenged by your lived experience and what the individual is sharing with you? What do? I'm glad you asked. You practice that reflexivity. You practice that asking yourself those questions. Who am I? What is going on in this moment? What is the concern of the person I'm listening to? And what are my concerns? How is it activating me? And as a result of that self-reflection, you're also going to be able to identify something that challenges our ability to listen well and to help co-create story. And that is compassion fatigue. Self-reflexivity allows you and I to recognize when we aren't able to be fully present with these individuals because we have not been taking care of ourselves, or we're just simply exhausted. You know, coronavirus has pushed so many of us to the limits, hasn't it? We are not able to engage with people. We're always before a camera, connecting and having to be on. And one of the interesting phenomena that's coming out of this is for a generation of people who enjoy using their devices to stay connected, right? That's why social media has been king for several years. We're finding there's a fatigue of being in front of the camera. There's a fatigue of being isolated. And the reason we're being isolated is because it is for our well-being and our health, right? And yet, we're exhausted. Aren't you exhausted? I have found myself sitting in my office at home at the very beginning of the pandemic when we had stay-at-home orders, being exhausted at the end of the day, and then assessing and going, well, why am I so tired? Because you were in front of this camera, you were talking to people, you had to be paying attention, you were literally on the whole time. Not only that, you were also navigating, or I should say, I was also navigating my own concerns about contracting the virus, my own concerns about the mental well-being of my children, my own concerns of the mental well-being of my partner, Delroy, who, as a pastor, was processing and trying to navigate, how do I take care of a community of believers when I can't do the thing that we do, which is gather them together. So compassion fatigue will surface, and our ability to recognize it really hinges on our own self-reflexivity and awareness of how we're doing and what's going on with us. And Pastor Terry has a talk that he's done and just talking about self-care. And I just wanted to put a plug in there and just to say it to you here so you'll hear it again. We have to pay attention to ourselves. We have to look at our own stories. We have to understand how our own lived experience shows up in the pastoral care experience. I'm going to say it again. We have to pay attention to ourselves and recognize how our own lived experiences show up when we are engaging with those who are coming for pastoral care. So we've talked about the three main tools, right? Listening, storytelling, and story crafting. We've talked about the importance of noting the kind of approach we're going to use, which is an intercultural approach, where we remember that people are like all others, like some others, and like no others. And I want to share one of my favorite quotes from Ellen White. And she says, "Christ's methods alone will give true success in reaching the people. The Savior mingled with men as one who desired their good. He showed his sympathy for them, ministered to their needs, and won their confidence. Then he bade them, 'Follow me.'" And that's from Ministry of Healing, page 143. Why do I love this particular quote? I love this quote because it really applies to practical theology, which is what we do, friends. As campus chaplains, we are practical theologians. We are where the rubber meets the road. We are where the praxis happens. We are the ones who embody and help to make alive Christ's love in the world. It is a coming alongside people. It is this gift and this privilege and this blessing to come alongside people as Jesus did, to really be with the people and to show that God's love meets them where they are. You know, in the campus environment, we get to learn so many things about people's lives. We mingle with people that come from all walks of life, and for many of them, this is the first time that they have been able to articulate or share their story, to actually narrate their lived experience and have someone that can come alongside them to help them process that experience theologically. The last thing I want to share as an important part of the Campus Chaplains Toolbox, alongside listening, storytelling, story crafting, is referring. Yes, friends. Refer, refer, refer. I actually have a t-shirt that says Jesus and therapy. Highly, highly recommended. Why am I saying this? As campus chaplains, while it is true that we care about and we pay attention to both the emotions and the spiritual needs of the care seekers, we are not trained to do long-term therapy. As a matter of fact, right now, I am in school getting a doctorate in pastoral care and counseling. It's a specialty, right? You actually go back and you learn how to be a counselor. And when we sit with people across the table or sit next to them, or we're on Zoom or FaceTime with them, we are not entering, or we should not be entering, into therapeutic alliances and therapeutic conversations, because that is not our specialty. Now, one of the things that I am able to do when I talk to my students, when I say you should talk to a therapist, is, in my context, we actually have a support system that I can actually call students. I can call for students, or I can give them the number for the counselor, and I can follow up and make sure that they're doing this. For several of my students, I have been a part of their mental health support team. They see a therapist, some see psychiatrists, some see psychologists, and they also come and they see me. My role in the team, right, is to help them process theologically and to reflect theologically on some of the issues that surface for them as they're going through therapy. Or as we are doing that theological reflection we talked about and that self-reflection we talked about, and I sense that there are some issues or concerns that would require someone else's discipline, then I make the recommendation. There have even been some students who I don't allow to leave my office until they call a therapist and make an appointment. And then I check in on them to make sure they're continuing to go to see their therapist. Now, I can't make anyone do anything that they don't want to do. It is, however, my responsibility as a campus chaplain to ensure that they flourish and they thrive, and I participate with the individuals who make this possible. The alliances that you form with your mental health or your mental wellness team is critical to the success of your ministry in that campus context. Now, if we're going to be honest, in the Christian Adventist context, we're not always open to going to see therapists. It hasn't been something that we have encouraged. And I think as campus chaplains, that's one of the things we get to do. We get to help our community understand the value of mental health support, mental health assessment, and to break down the stigma attached to that. How does a person navigate bipolar disease, right? If they don't have someone they can talk with. How does someone navigate their depression, their clinical depression? They need to know that God's love doesn't get limited because they're not perfect or because they have a mental health issue. So the referral is the final tool that I want to give you as basic tools, the referral process as basic tools in the Campus Chaplains Toolbox. So I will review for you, my friends. I'm so glad we had this opportunity to reflect on this Campus Chaplains Toolbox. Listening well is our first tool. Utilizing the tool of storytelling and story crafting, and finally, using the referral process as a way to engage your community towards living lives that are not limited, that flourish and lead to the abundance that Jesus Christ promised was ours.
Paul, when we talk about chaplaincy, there is one thing that keeps me awake at night, and that is our campus chaplains. The present and the future of our church is in their hands. They are molding the minds of our young people for the future. What they do will tell whether those young people will be faithful to the church, will support the church with their skills and also with their funding. So, at the campus chaplain, God has placed in their hands the spiritual care given to the institutions that they are employed by. How can you implement meaningful change? How can you impact the life of your leadership? Chaplain Swenson will provide a process and tools to reach your goals in initiating institutional change.
In this seminar, what we're going to be talking about is initiating change. How to be a change factor in your institution where you're doing your campus ministry at. So the first question we have to ask is, why? Not on the screen, there's a big why posted. And you need to know why. Not what, why. If you're wanting to make a change, not just in your ministerial context, but as your institution all the way across the board, why do you want to do it? Well, the why is because you are called of God, you are placed at your institution. Now your president or HR might think they hired you, but they didn't. They followed God's will to put you in the context where you needed to be, and you have been called there. You are the only person that can do what God wants you to do there at the place you are. Own that. Believe in that. And you're going to need to claim that. So, you are the spiritual care agent. How can you do that best? What do you need to do to empower that? Your spiritual care, not just to students, which usually in the context of campus chaplaincy, they believe that's what you're there for, the students. I call them the kids, because I'm so old, everybody's a kid compared to me here at Loma Linda University. But you are the spiritual care agent for everybody that walks around on your campus, the place where God has said is your land to do His care in His way. So know why you want to give the care, or the change, and what that change will be. But let's talk about the process of knowing the what. We've got the why down, but what are you going to do, all right? So when we talk about initiating change, first of all, understand the institutional mission of where you work. What is the mission of the place? Well, let me use an example of where God has given me to work, and with Dilys Brooks as my chaplain, and I'm head director of University Spiritual Care, and we have an assistant, Casey Hohensee, who's an assistant chaplain. The three of us. What is the understanding of Loma Linda? What is the institutional mission? Well, I can tell you. The institutional mission is to continue the teaching and healing ministry of Jesus Christ to make man, to make people whole. And we do that through the delivery of health care. So Loma Linda is a health science institution. All the aspects of medical care, doctor, nurse, therapist, pharmacy, etc., nutrition, all of those things. So the mission of this place is to train people, individuals, to provide health care that will both teach people and heal people in the method and mission, the message of Jesus Christ. Okay, so I understand what my institution is about, or what they say is the guiding mission principle for them. And you have one where you are. And if it's not written down, find out what it is if it's an unspoken one, because you need to understand the mission, where the institution you're giving spiritual care at is trying to go. Secondly, know the institutional values. What are the values that your institution holds as anchor points for you in accomplishing your mission? Well, here at Loma Linda, I can tell you. Currently, and they're doing a little adjustment right now, but currently for the university where I work, it's justice, compassion, humility, excellence, integrity, freedom, and self-control. So that's the values that are going to help us get to the mission. The third thing you need to do is this. You need to be aware of the institutional challenges and realities. Not just what your position of spiritual care, but what are they facing as far as budgets? What are they facing, excuse me, as far as accreditation? What are they facing as far as expansion, physical plan? All the parts of the institution, you need to be aware of those, the challenges and the realities. Why? So you can care for the people who are in care of those things. You know their world. And fourthly, you determine the institutional leadership center style. How is your institution led? How do the leaders lead? What is the way in which they lead? The philosophy from which they lead from. So, let's look at leadership center styles. And you can see some of the examples here in the graphics. The first one is power-centered. Power-centered. That's kind of the leadership style we see in industry, institutions, governments. There's someone or some ones up at the top, and they're the power. They're the who says. They're the ones who said what you need to do. So they hold that power and they tell you what to do, and they tell your institution or where you're at how to act and how to behave and what direction you're going in. Power-centered. Nobody questions the power. You do what you're told. Another leadership center style is profit-centered. Profit-centered. Now, most of us as campus chaplains work for nonprofits. In other words, they need to make money. Let's be clear. If, for example, at a university or a college, they want to teach, they want to do all these other wonderful things, but at the end of the day, if they don't get more in profit than what their expenses are, they're going to go broke and they're going to close. But is profit the driving force? Is it everything, that everything else is subservient to profit? Because that's going to tell you how leadership works. That's going to tell you how they're going to treat you and people. It's also going to tell you how you as a spiritual caregiver is going to care for individuals. Is the leadership center style where you're at as chaplain mission-centered? So for example, Loma Linda is saying we are mission-centered through health care. Health care, as Ellen White said, is the right arm of the gospel. So we're about right arm gospel sharing through health care. That's a mission. The mission drives Loma Linda. And that helps me to understand when I talk to leaders, when I talk to employees, faculty and students, where they're coming from a mission-centered position. All right. So what is Jesus' leadership-centered method? There's a lot of examples of it in the Bible. One that I want to share with you today is found in the book of John. The first part from John 14, 11 through 17. And I'm reading from the New Living Translation. And Jesus is giving the example of the sheep industry, so to speak. He's talking about the shepherd, who's the lead, and the sheep, who are the product, and the individuals involved. And this is what Jesus says about leadership in his kingdom, or in his enterprise, or shall we say in his institution. Jesus says, I am the good shepherd. He's a leader. The good shepherd sacrifices his life for the sheep. Now he's gonna contrast it against someone who's not mission-centered or shepherd-centered, so to speak, who's only here for the money. A hired hand will run when he sees a wolf coming. He'll abandon the sheep because they don't belong to him, and he isn't their shepherd. And so the wolf attacks him and scatters the flock. The hired hand runs away because he's working only for the money and doesn't really care about the sheep. So Jesus says, I am the good shepherd. I know my sheep. And the know is there an intimate relational knowing, not just, oh yeah, that's my sheep. He knows the sheep by name, the way they act, what they do. I know my sheep, and they know me. There's this depth of relationship. Just as my Father knows me, and I know the Father. So I sacrifice my life for the sheep. I have other sheep too. So he's talking about in the context of when he was there, when he was here on earth, and now he's pointing and looking at you and me here today in this seminar. I have other sheep too that are not in this fold, but I must bring them also. They'll listen to my voice, and there will be one flock with one shepherd. This concept of leading from a Christ-centric place is revealed and reiterated in John 21 when Jesus is, after the resurrection, talking to Peter by the lake after Peter's denial, and Jesus reinstating him to leadership. He says, a third time, we're told, Jesus asked Peter, Simon, son of John, do you love me? And Peter was hurt that Jesus asked the question a third time. And he said, Lord, you know everything. You know that I love you. And Jesus said, then feed my sheep. So let's use this metaphor of sheep and how leaders work with them so we can understand eventually how we can do like what we talked about. This was how you as a chaplain and spiritual caregiver can initiate changes or a change on your institution, looking at leadership. So as we look up on the screen, we see this picture of, we'll call it lamb chops, I don't know if it is or not, in a meat counter. This is how this type of leadership style would view the sheep that Jesus is talking about, where they're viewed if you have an ownership leadership style. If it's ownership, then the person, the head, the top leader, views your institution as their own. Or if we're just going in a purely business style, it's I own my own business. Therefore, how I'm going to act and how I'm going to treat that business is based on who owns this business. So if I own this business, it's my personal investment. And if it's my personal investment, if profits start to go down, I'm going to act accordingly. That means people's jobs are cut, programs are slighted. Maybe your position as a campus chaplain giving spiritual care might be cut back, your budget done away with, or they might just do away with you altogether and figure a local church pastor can handle it. That has happened more than once. Because I own this business, it's my personal investment, and I'm focused, if we're using a secular business again, I'm focused on success at all costs. Because success reflects and impacts me. I own it. So I will cut, chop, do away with whatever it is because my business is my business. And I don't want to look bad, and I don't want to lose money, and it's all about me as a leader. That's what Jesus is saying in John when he says the difference between the shepherd and the hired people. The hired people looked at the sheep as like, forget it, give it to the wolf. But yet Jesus is saying, no, they're my sheep. Jesus is not doing the ownership style like I'm saying it. This is from a human vantage point. You, me, if we owned our business, the leaders of your institution, is it their business? Well, if it is their business, they view it, they're going to act this way. They're going to respond in this way. But that's not the way Christ wants them or us to be leaders. Leadership center style that Jesus is looking at, and the Bible says time and again, Jesus too, it's stewardship. Now, if I own the business, I'm going to act in a way that, kind of like we showed with the lamb chops. If I'm a steward in my leadership, or in my institution's leadership, if they focus as stewards, they treat it as a whole different thing. It's investment in what the owner desires. What's the owner's idea for this? What's the owner's directive for this? They'll also focus on what the owner wants to have happen at all costs. Biblical parable. The story of the 3 servants. A rich man is going to go away on a long business trip. And he calls in the first servant and says, look, I'm giving you this amount of money. I want you to take care of it for when I come back. And he does it for the second servant and the third. Now Jesus says the first servant goes and invests it and gets a good, healthy profit. And when the owner comes back, he calls in the servant and he says, well, how'd you do? And he said, look, I took your money and I invested it. Here it is for you. He says, you're a good servant. The next one comes in. He did even better with his investments. He says, fabulous. You like tripled my investment, because that servant was a steward, just like the first one, looking after the business and the best interests of the owner. And then the third servant comes in and he hands it back to him. Here. He said, and the owner's looking at it and looking at him. He said, I know you're a hard man. I know you're cutthroat in business. So I just buried it in the ground because I want to make sure I didn't lose it, because I'm looking out after me. And Jesus says, you miserable servant, in the parable, the owner says, you miserable servant, I'm taking what you had and I'm giving it to the guy who looked after my interest the most. That's what Jesus is talking about. So let's say if in our institutions, we don't just say we own it because I'm the president, vice president, deans, whatever the name of the hierarchical chart is where you're at, that the president here of Loma Linda does not own Loma Linda. God owns Loma Linda. The mission is to follow what Jesus Christ says, so that I might look at how I run the university, how we run the medical system in an entirely different way. So you follow that? But I hear you through the screen, through the magic of media. I hear what you're thinking. You're saying, wait a minute, you said this was a topic about how do I, as a local campus chaplain, initiate change. Well, you see, it all goes back to understanding how things work where I'm at. Loma Linda University, remember, know your mission. The mission is to continue Jesus' ministry. So that means we don't own Loma Linda. Who owns it? God does. And so who are you? Who am I? I am called to be the spiritual caregiver. I am the campus chaplain involved with the spiritual care and nurture of everybody from the president down to the newest freshman student. I know the leadership style that is here or should be here. I know and will focus on what the owner wants at all costs, which could mean I need to live in a way that I have to be true to God, or maybe even true and expand what my job description says in a way that God calls me to, in a way that builds the institution, in a way that's what the shepherd is saying and not what I'm trying to make the shepherd say. Are you hearing me? I mean, you understand? So as we look at the next slide, we see leading from a spiritual center. That's the leadership, that's the initiative originating place you need to lead from as a chaplain. So what is that? Leading from a spiritual center means that we seek to know God's will and where He is wanting to go and focus and lead, and then we follow Him. Now, I know we say that, we do that. Maybe you do, I don't know. But for many people, what they do is they say they're going to go with God's will. They pray before a planning session comes, Lord, be with us, help us to do your will. Okay, let's go, and we do our planning, strategic planning, we do our brainstorming. You see what we're doing? Or what we do at the end is say, well, God, here's our plans. Don't they look great? Bless them. That's not what leading from a spiritual center is all about. What leading from a spiritual center means is I'm in tune with God. I'm doing my relationship and connectedness with Him. I understand where I'm at, and then I'm looking, God, in light of where you're at, what are you leading me to do? And then you build your planning, your initiatives out from there. When I say that God is saying this or that needed at Loma Linda, because remember, I know the challenges that the different departments, schools, the administration and people are facing here, the faculty are what the students are facing, then I can go and say, God, how do I do this? By knowing God, by knowing who I am and what I'm capable of, and my authority position as a chaplain. I'm not going to go push the president out of the way and say, I'm taking over this committee and chairing it, buddy. That's not going to work. But I need to know who I am and what my role is. And also by knowing others, knowing what they need, knowing how I can spiritually care for them and help to direct where the university needs to go according to what God is leading us, because He's the owner of our institutions. That's why you're a campus chaplain. So leading from a spiritual center puts us in touch with our power, which is God, which is Jesus. Not the accrediting body, not the alumni, not the donors, not the financial investments, not the numbers of students and all these other things that we need, but the power comes from God. I need to know that. And I need to know our purpose. It's simply this. Jesus said, build the gospel kingdom. Build the kingdom of Jesus Christ. And what's the plan? His example. How He led. How He lived. How He directed us to live. And how that incarnates, how that plays out in real time where you're at or where I'm at. So, leading from a spiritual center. Strategic planning. How do we plan from a spiritual center? You're wanting to initiate change. You've been praying. You've been seeking God's will. You've talked with others to see if it isn't some dream you had in the middle of the night and it's not God's dream, to make sure it's His word, His way. And then what do? You want to initiate change. The first thing you do is not type it up, write it up, do it on a PowerPoint, however you want. Go into the leadership council or the board and say, guys, women, men, here's how we're going to go. It's not going to work. I can tell you, that won't work. But what you do first is this. Are you ready? You build relationships with the leaders. You're their chaplain too, by the way. You're not, if they think you're just for students, they're not. Go and get to know your leaders. In my case, the presidents, the vice presidents, the deans, the associate deans, the faculty, the change makers, the ones who can take the initiatives and make them live. I need to build relationships with them. So I know them and they know me. I pour into their life so that I have credence. I have some reserve with them when I come. Building relationships with leaders here in as big a place as I work at Loma Linda, where I'm actually, we're recording this, is I sit on committees. Ooh, I heard all those groans. I'm not even in the room with you. Yes, committees. Why? Because that's their world. That's where administrators live. And when I sit on a committee, I understand their world. And I try to say intelligent things that feed into their world. And I build relationships because they're open to me, because they know I know their world. And what am I doing on a committee? I'm the spiritual caregiver on campus. That impacts everybody. I need to be on committees. So I build relationships with leaders. I know what they're facing. I know what their vision is. So then I go one-on-one conversations with them. I go on the committees, appropriate ones, and I just talk. And I start casting the spiritual vision. What does that mean for Loma Linda? When I was hired at Loma Linda 22 years ago, that's a long time. I probably look at it. I was young and had hair, okay? The good old days. Anyway, I'm back with you. So when I came, the role was, oh, you're a pastor, and just run and be a pastor on campus. Oh, so what does that mean? I preach, I run Bible studies, and I do sermons, and what I do in a church. Well, yes, but no, because I, as a spiritual caregiver, enter into people's lives in a way that I'm nurturing them where they're at spiritually to grow. There's differences. Look it up, read about that. Contact, ACM, do studies, take clinical pastoral education, all these things that'll talk about that. That's not germane, that's not the focus of what we're talking about here. But do listen and learn from that, because there's a difference. So when you come with your spiritual care vision, I come and I said, listen, we're not just for the students, as they thought. Go, basically, your youth pastor, go do programs with the students and keep them spiritual and try to make Adventists out of them if they're not, or keep them Adventists if there are. But yet I said, no, I spiritually care. I care for the employees, the faculty. I care for you as an administrator, all the way up to the president. And then, so what is the spiritual care vision? How can that live out? In the United States right now, we're dealing with diversity, equity, and inclusion, with racial issues, with brown people and black people and their place in society. And it affects Loma Linda University because we have students from 90 different countries, 85 different religions, large populations of African American, African Caribbean, African diaspora people, as well as Latinx and a bunch of people. What is the spiritual care vision? How does that speak into those type of things as we develop ways and mechanisms, corporate ways of living and teaching? What's the spiritual component of that? So casting your spiritual vision. If you don't know the place you're at, if you don't know what their mission is, and you don't know what their values are, if you certainly don't know the issues and problems and challenges that your administrators and leaders are facing, and you don't have a relationship with them, forget it. You are not going to initiate change. That's strong, isn't it? I know, I've tried. It won't work. It won't work anywhere. That's just a fact of human life. But as you're doing this, as you've come from a spiritual center, as you've done all of these steps that I've said and talked about, there's one last key thing in this. It's going to happen in God's way, in God's time. I'll say it again. It's going to happen in God's way. If it's God's initiative that He's given to you, it's going to happen in God's way, in God's time. Well, God's more patient than I am. And I try to push the envelope sometime. And sometimes I've try to push the initiative through because I've done all the other things, pray, know God's will, all that. But God's way, God's time. I knew it was God's way, but I wanted to make it Terry's time. It didn't work. But eventually when I released that and let God lead in His time, at the right moment, when He's put all the behind the scene things I don't even know about come into play, when the moment comes, it happens. I have example after example that I could share with you, but I won't right now. So, here's the last slide. If you haven't had her yet, that's my campus chaplain. That's my ride or die buddy, Chaplain Dilys Brooks. You're going to be in her seminars. If you're not, you better be. And this is what she tells me all the time. And there she is smiling, and I can see her hitting her hand. Do your work. Do your work. Do God's work. Know Him. Know yourself. Build into yourself. Build the relationships. Go with the position and authority you have as chaplain, as God's spiritual caregiver on your campus. And go with the love and care and compassion and the modalities of Jesus Christ. And then, know this, God's way, God's time, which means you may do steps, but you may not be the one that gets that initiative through. You may be the kickoff guy. You may start it, but God may finish it through others. Do your work. Do the kingdom work. Change the place where you're at in God's ways and change the kingdom in the world for Him. God bless you in all that you do.
Thank you for joining us for the 3rd Adventist Chaplaincy World Congress. We'll be back after lunch in just 90 minutes.